From Washington, I am Al Hunt.
And I'm Robert Novak. More of CNN's live coverage of America's new war continues next.
I'm Wolf Blitzer in Washington.
And I'm Joey Chen at CNN Center in Atlanta. To our viewers, we want to bring you up to date on the latest developments in America's new war, the fight against terrorism. President Bush has declared the United States at war and called on the country's fighting men and women to get ready. Today, he huddled with his top security advisors at Camp David. Meeting with President Bush at this hour are the Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld and other top military advisors. The focus for them is to define the enemy and to offer a response. The president warning that this is a different kind of enemy, fighting on a battlefield without boundaries. In New York and in Washington today, massive rescue operations continue at the World Trade Center. 152 bodies recovered, and the list of the missing grows to more than 4,900 people. On Wall Street, officials from the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ say that all systems are go, that the U.S. markets will be able to open as planned Monday at 9:30 in the morning Eastern. These markets have been closed now for 4 days, which is the longest time since World War I. Earlier in the day, officials tested the databases and communication lines of the exchanges and concluded that the market is ready for business. Treasury Secretary Paul O'Neill is planning to attend Monday's opening bell.
President Bush, meanwhile, is steeling the nation for an assault on terrorism that he vows will go on, quote, as long as it takes. CNN's White House correspondent Kelly Wallace is near Camp David, joins us now with more. Kelly, tell us what's going on.
Well, Wolf, President Bush sending out a number of messages as he and his aides go over military options. He's telling a public anxious for some sort of retaliation to be patient. At the same time, he is preparing the American people for a military campaign against terrorists and those who harbor them that could last months, if not years, and could involve using ground troops.
Spending the weekend at the secluded presidential retreat in the Maryland mountains, President Bush huddles with his national security team and prepares the American people for war.
We're at war. There's been an act of war declared upon America by terrorists, and we will respond accordingly.
The president refuses to discuss military options, but for the first time, he specifically named suspected terrorist Osama bin Laden as a, quote, prime suspect behind Tuesday's terrorism spree. Bin Laden is believed to be hiding out in Afghanistan, with the ruling Taliban government providing him safe haven.
This act will not stand. We will find those who did it. We will smoke them out of their holes. We will get them running, and we'll bring them to justice.
When asked if those words mean President Bush is considering using ground troops to attack terrorists, aides say nothing has been ruled out. But winning this so-called war and finding the elusive bin Laden won't be easy, says a former Clinton administration official.
We're not fighting a military, we're not fighting an organized power, but we're fighting a very diffuse and shadowy organization that has links in many different parts of the world.
Knowing Americans are hungry for swift retaliation, the president uses his radio address to say a sweeping response will come in time.
You will be asked for your patience, for the conflict will not be short. You will be asked for resolve, for the conflict will not be easy. You will be asked for your strength, because the course to victory may be long.
And aides say President Bush has gained strength from his meeting Friday with more than 200 family members with loved ones still missing, believing his job is to turn their sorrow into something positive for future generations.
And while the American people overwhelmingly support some form of military retaliation, keeping that support up could become a bigger and bigger challenge for the president over time, especially if any lengthy campaign involves the loss of additional American lives. Wolf?
Kelly, tell our viewers why the White House regards Pakistan and Pakistan's cooperation as so important to this new war on terrorism.
Well, Wolf, of course, Pakistan neighbors Afghanistan and is one of only 3 countries recognizing the ruling Taliban government as the government of Afghanistan. And of course, we know the Taliban providing safe haven to Osama bin Laden. We do know, according to a Pakistani official, that President Bush called Pakistani President Musharraf this morning to thank him for his support. The White House had no comment on the call, but Secretary of State Colin Powell confirming today what CNN had been reporting since yesterday, that the Pakistanis have agreed to fully cooperate with the U.S. in the fight against terrorism. Secretary Powell saying that the Pakistanis have agreed to all of the requests made by the United States, and sources saying one of those requests include allowing U.S. warplanes access to Pakistani airspace if the U.S. decides to attack, and obviously very crucial for U.S. warplanes to fly into that airspace if there is any attack on Afghanistan. Wolf, back to you.
And Kelly, while I have you, we saw Vice President Dick Cheney sitting alongside the president at that meeting at Camp David. Earlier in the week, they had separated supposedly out of security concerns. They didn't want the president and the vice president at the same location. Are those security concerns gone now, or is Camp David unique?
Well, security concerns are still there, Wolf. You know, the U.S. still operating on a high state of alert. As you noted, Vice President Cheney spending a few days at Camp David because the U.S. Secret Service deciding, based on ongoing security concerns, that it would be best not to have the president and the vice president in the same location. But they both are at Camp David. It is obviously a very secure location, but I do believe that the U.S. still very concerned about the security threat out there and still operating on a high state of alert. Wolf?
Kelly Wallace near Camp David up in Thurmont, Maryland. Thank you very much. And we do have some news that our Justice Department producer Terry Friedman is informing us about. I want to be very precise. The Justice Department has just issued a second arrest warrant in connection with what is described as another material witness in this continuing investigation. We do not yet know the names or other details. Of course, we'll be providing those details to you as they become available. Once again, a second arrest warrant for a material witness just issued by the Justice Department. Meanwhile, even as the nation's military prepares for the next stage, rescue workers continue the grim task of recovering the bodies of the 189 victims of the Pentagon attack. CNN's military affairs correspondent Jamie McIntyre once again joins us now live. Jamie, give us the headlines.
Well, Wolf, the recovery effort here continues, and then the move will begin to shore up the building and strip away so it can be rebuilt. Just a short time ago, though, the Pentagon released some of its video that was shot by an Air Force cameraman of the initial aftermath of the plane hitting the side of the building. This video shot by Tech Sergeant Robert Stenberg, who grabbed his camera and got out in time to capture the side of the Pentagon actually collapsing. This happened about 45 minutes or so after the plane hit the building. Today, Pentagon, the project director for renovation, said that because of the reinforcement that had been put into this recently renovated part of the Pentagon, it held long enough for people to get out of that section of the building who weren't actually killed by the impact. It didn't collapse right away. It held long enough for people to get out, so they say that that was one of the improvements that had been put into the Pentagon as part of the renovation that paid off. Other improvements included special blast-proof glass that did not shatter, even the windows right near the impact area, sprinklers that kept the fire from spreading in one direction, and also special fire retardant walls as well. Wolf?
I don't know if you can answer this question, Jamie, but I'll ask you anyhow. How do officials in the building that you cover, the Pentagon, feel about eventually reopening Reagan National Airport, which of course is so close to the Pentagon?
Well, you know, I've only talked informally to people about this. I think the general feeling is that if the airport were to remain closed forever, that it would be handing the terrorists a victory, that it's important for the United States to go back to operate more normally, just as it's important to rebuild the Pentagon. Of course, the Pentagon is on a flight path right over National Airport, Reagan National Airport. The Secretary of Defense says he has got planes going over his office every 5 or 10 minutes, depending on the landing pattern. So it's very difficult to protect this building against a plane impact. But remember, the plane that crashed into this building did not take off from Reagan National Airport. It took off from Dulles, about 20 miles from here.
Jamie McIntyre at the Pentagon once again. Thank you very much. Back to you, Joey.
Wolf, the view now from a place so many of us know so very little about, but in Afghanistan right now, there's a clear sense of fear, the possibility of a U.S. attack because Afghanistan plays host to prime suspect Osama bin Laden. CNN's Nick Robertson reports now via videophone from Kabul.
Well, the latest information we have is that the Iranian government has ordered its border with Afghanistan sealed in the case of the aftermath of an American attack on Afghanistan that refugees try and flood across the border. Iran says it has 2 million Afghan refugees already and can't take any more. Now, this comes hard on the heels of the Pakistani government giving the go-ahead to United States support. That has implications in Afghanistan as well, because it could mean the border with Pakistan and Afghanistan is sealed. That would mean in the capital here, Kabul, and other cities around the country, shortages of food. Most food coming to Afghanistan comes from Pakistan and Iran. So the outlook for the people here in Kabul and the other cities fairly bleak. Already we know that there's been a little panic buying, people trying to buy up supplies in case of attack. Food prices have gone up 10 to 15%, and those with a little bit more money have been trying to get out of the city to see relatives in the country, or if they can, flee across those borders, particularly to Pakistan, before the borders close. The Taliban today did try to put pressure on Pakistan not to sign up to help America. They threatened that if any neighbor, particularly an Islamic one, was to help America by giving its soil or airspace to America, then they would consider them an enemy as well in case of attack, and then they might invade that country as well. So that's a clear statement, a clear threat towards Pakistan. A Council of Elders today also told the Taliban here in Afghanistan that they shouldn't close the door to diplomacy, but they did say, and they made it very clear, that if Afghanistan was attacked, then the Council of Elders, which represents many of the tribes here in Afghanistan, would throw their complete support behind the Taliban. Nick Robertson, CNN, Kabul, Afghanistan.
So if the president does order an attack, the question here, how does the United States build and keep the support of key players, and what role would other nations play? CNN military affairs consultant General Wesley Clark is joining us here in the studio. General, if you could explain to us, you know, a lot of us think of you military men as making simply military decisions and not being too concerned about the diplomatic side, but really it must be hand in hand.
Well, in any military operation, the diplomacy actually has to go first, because you have to gain access for the military forces. But in this case, it's even more intricate, because the primary weapon will be information and police actions, and the military will only come later, or if there's a particular requirement for the military. So the lead has to be held by the diplomats in this.
Talk to us about the locations
map
of things. Right, General.
So, I mean, this is the area that everyone's concerned about, the country of Afghanistan. Surrounded by Pakistan on the south and east, Iran on the west, former states of the Soviet Union on the north, and somewhere in here, we believe, is Osama bin Laden. The Taliban movement has said that it will basically support him. It will not cooperate with the United States in turning him in. But the Taliban movement has been supported by and has relations with the government of Pakistan. The government of Pakistan has, and its president, have pledged full support and cooperation to the United States. Presumably, this government will help cut off support to the Taliban and Osama bin Laden.
So when we say the United States would like full support from Pakistan, what is it that the United States would need from Pakistan?
Well, let's speak hypothetically, because Secretary Powell has said he's going to keep that private, exactly what's been asked. But, for example, the things that you might ask are, first, cut off all supplies to the terrorists. Isolate and contain...
Because Afghanistan needs both food and fuel through Pakistan.
That's exactly right. And communications, and money, and weapons, and explosives, and many other things. So, want to cut this supply line. Then, if there are terrorist groups inside Pakistan, they need to be detained. And then if we have information about the locations of the terrorist groups inside Afghanistan, Pakistan needs to provide that information to the United States. And the list goes on and on and on about what specific information could be provided, what specific assistance could be given. And those will be matters of the closest, most detailed consultation between the United States and Pakistan. But the ideal solution to this crisis is and remains that the Taliban itself has a change of heart. and recognizes that what Osama bin Laden has done is not representative of Islam at all, but the opposite, and turns him over to justice.
So if Islamic leaders then would join, not only in Afghanistan but throughout the region, if Islamic leaders would join in putting the pressure